Hey there, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking a look at how one single country managed to tackle a global crisis that, honestly, feels completely unsolvable most of the time: homelessness. It's this incredibly complex issue that plagues almost every major city around the world, creating these vicious cycles of poverty that just seem impossible to break. But, as we're going to see by digging into the history and the data today, it really doesn't have to be this way. Take a look at this. Finland is the absolutely only country in the European Union where homelessness is actively falling. I mean, that is just a staggering anomaly, right? While the rest of the world is watching their numbers surge because of rising living costs and major housing shortages, Finland is somehow moving in the exact opposite direction. So how on earth are they pulling this off? What's their secret? Okay, let's dive right into this. We're going to break down Finland's success into 4 key steps today. First up, we'll look at a radical paradigm shift in their policy. Second, the physical eradication of night shelters. Third, the immense power of collaboration. And finally, we'll look at the actual dollars and cents, the cost of ending homelessness. All right, starting off with Section 1, a radical paradigm shift, changing the model. This right here is where everything begins. It's the core intellectual pivot that completely revolutionized Finland's approach to housing. For decades, Finland, and honestly most of the world, relied on what's known as the staircase model. The basic idea was that people experiencing homelessness had to somehow solve their personal problems first, like, substance abuse or mental health issues, just to earn a permanent home. You kind of had to climb these temporary steps, from the streets to shelters to transitional housing, basically as a reward for getting your life on track. But in 2008, Finland realized, well, this just isn't working. It was keeping people totally trapped. So they just flipped the script to housing first. They made stable housing completely unconditional. They essentially declared that a home isn't a reward for getting your life together. It's a fundamental human right, and it's the absolute prerequisite for actually solving any of those other problems. Just listen to this quote from Juha Kakinen. He's one of the pioneers of this model and the CEO of the Y Foundation. He really hits the nail on the head here. He said, to say, look, you don't need to solve your problems before you get a home. Instead, he argues that a home should be the secure foundation that makes it easier to solve those problems. By totally reversing the old assumptions we have about addiction, mental health, and housing, they realized something pretty profound. You really can't expect someone to get sober or find a steady job when they literally don't even know where they're going to sleep that night. Moving right along to Section 2, eradicating the night shelters, physical transformation. Now, changing your philosophy on paper is one thing, right? But completely overhauling the physical infrastructure of an entire country, that's a whole different ballgame. Just look at the stark reality of this 1928 Salvation Army shelter. Look at how tightly those beds are lined up together. For a very long time, this was basically the standard global response to homelessness, cramming dozens of people into large, communal dorms just to keep them from freezing on the streets. And sure, it kept people alive, but it offered zero privacy, zero dignity, and honestly, it didn't help people transition out of homelessness at all. If anything, it just institutionalized them. So Finland systematically started dismantling that old system. Check out this timeline. In 2008, the government launched the Paavo I policy to aggressively tackle long-term homelessness. By 2012, massive, sweeping changes were happening. Famous old shelters, like the huge Alpikatu shelter in Helsinki, were literally gutted and completely converted. Fast forward to 2015, and rough sleeping, meaning people actually sleeping outdoors, was practically eradicated in Helsinki. And keep in mind, we are talking about a city where winter temperatures can easily plunge to minus 20 degrees Celsius. No joke. Now, looking ahead, the government's ultimate goal is the total eradication of all homelessness nationwide by 2027. This whole physical transformation was actually heavily inspired by a pivotal 2007 report, beautifully titled Nimi Ovessa, which translates to Your Name on the Door. And really, that concept is everything. It meant taking those grim, packed night shelters and transforming them into permanent, supported, independent apartments. Every single individual gets their own lease, their own key, and their own private door. They pay rent, often using standard housing benefits, and they receive on-site support if they need it. The key shift here? They become tenants, not inmates. Which brings us to Section 3, the power of collaboration, a coordinated effort. Because let's be real, a radical idea and a handful of converted buildings just aren't enough to change an entire country. This whole thing required a massive, perfectly coordinated machine to actually succeed.
Finland's success isn't just a story about one hero organization, it's this incredible triad of cooperation. You have the central state doing the heavy lifting with funding, discounted loans, and top-down policy. Then the municipalities and local city governments handle the services. They act as intermediaries, providing crucial on-the-ground support like mental health care and financial counseling. And finally, the third sector steps up. These are the NGOs, specifically groups like the Y Foundation, who actually go out and acquire, build, and manage the apartments.
I really want to let this number sink in for a second. 18,000. That is the sheer volume of apartments owned by the Y Foundation across Finland. They are nonprofit, yet they're the fourth largest landlord in the entire country. Their primary mission is simply providing affordable, permanent housing to the people who need it the absolute most. They go out and purchase flats on the private market, they build brand new apartment blocks, and then they rent them out to municipalities who in turn house individuals experiencing homelessness. So the crucial point here is captured perfectly by this phrase. You can't have housing first without having housing first. I know, it sounds a bit like a tongue twister, but honestly, it is exactly where so many other countries fail. You can have all the greatest policies and the most dedicated social workers in the world, but if you don't physically build or buy the actual housing stock to put people in, the whole model just collapses. Finland recognized that if housing supply is rigid, simply funding rentals just drives up prices. So they actually went out and physically built and bought the homes.
All right, moving to our final section, Section 4, the cost of ending homelessness, counterintuitive econ. Now, I know exactly what a lot of you are probably thinking right now. Giving people unconditional, permanent homes? That has got to completely bankrupt the state, right? Well, let's look at the counterintuitive economics of it all. Yes, there is a massive upfront cost. Finland spent roughly 250 million euros creating these new homes and hiring around 300 additional specialized support workers. You simply cannot execute a paradigm shift of this magnitude without acknowledging the reality of the required investment. It takes real, actual money to build real apartments and hire real professionals to provide that tailored support. But here is the number that changes the entire conversation: 15,000 euros. That is the estimated amount of money the Finnish government saves annually, per person, when they move a long-term homeless individual off the streets and into supported housing. Why? Well, because people living on the streets are unfortunately a massive drain on a city's most expensive emergency services. They frequently have to use emergency rooms, they interact constantly with the police, and they often end up in the justice system. But when you give someone a safe home, those emergency costs just vanish. Over time, this policy literally pays for itself. And the long-term human and statistical payoff is just undeniable. If you look at this data, between the launch of the policy in 2008 and 2022, long-term homelessness in Finland decreased by a staggering 68%. That is not just some statistical anomaly, that's a direct, sustained result of integrating housing with social assistance and just flat out refusing to let people fall through the cracks. They decided to treat the root cause and not just slap a Band-Aid on the symptoms. But, we always have to remember that behind every single chart and data point is a real human life. Just look at this quote from a tenant named Inejma, who moved into one of those newly converted housing units in Helsinki. He said, "I own nothing, but now I have my place, it's mine, I can build." Wow, that is the absolute essence of housing first. It restores human dignity. It gives people living on the extreme margins the safe, secure foundation they desperately need to rebuild their trust, their health, and ultimately, their futures. So that leaves us with one really big question. If providing unconditional homes is definitively proven to save both money and lives, why isn't the rest of the world doing it? To replicate this, it requires a fundamental shift in how we view housing. We have to stop seeing it as a conditional reward for good behavior and start treating it as a basic human right. I'd really challenge you to look at how your own community tackles this issue, but maybe through this new lens. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this gave you a completely new perspective on what is actually possible.